we're very honored to have you here as a speaker and to learn the lessons of your long fight for reproductive justice in Canada, as well as other crucial issues of social justice. Judy was a prominent member of the abortion rights movement in the 1980s in Canada, and has also been a celebrated journalist and a TV commentator, helped launch the Rabble.ca news site, which is a really wonderful source of information online from a progressive viewpoint. She was president of the National Action Committee on the Status of Women from 1990 to 93, and has written 3 books: 10,000 Roses, The Making of a Feminist Revolution, Transforming Power from the Personal to the Political, and Occupy This. She's the subject of a documentary called Judy versus Capitalism. And Christina will put a link in the chat. You can see the trailer for that. And there is a website where you can register and sign up to see the whole film, I believe. And Judy's activism continues today as defender of Ukraine and as a Jewish opponent of Israel's genocide in Gaza, which is so important and such a really important leadership role there. So thank you for coming to share your insights, and we'll have Judy can have a speak, and then we'll have about 20 minutes for questions and discussion. So look forward to hearing from you. We will be recording this segment, and then when we switch to discussion, that will be the end of the recording. Go ahead, Judy.
Okay, so do you want to just tell me when I have 5 minutes left?
Okay.
Well, first of all, I'm very happy to be with you all. I can't imagine what it must be like right now to be in the United States fighting for reproductive justice, and I admire you all for continuing to do that. You know, from what we can see up here, things look pretty scary. And yeah, so we're doing what we can. We'll do what we can in solidarity, but you know, and really the attack on abortion rights was the first sign of what was coming afterwards. So yeah, so thank you for all you do. So I'm going to talk about the what we called the pro-choice struggle, because that's what we called it back then in the 80s in Canada. And I think there's some misunderstandings about it too that I've heard from some American feminists. So I want to correct those. But if you want, the battle for abortion rights in Canada started in 1969 when Pierre Elliott Trudeau, who now looks pretty good in comparison to everybody who came after, but who we didn't like too much at the time. I mean, he was really sexist, like. But anyway, it was 1968. Everybody was really sexist. So he brought in a law which legalized homosexuality, but only in private, and legalized abortion. Can you hear me? Yeah. And legalized abortion, but only in a hospital with approval from a therapeutic abortion committee of 3 doctors and a 4th doctor to perform the procedure. So as you can imagine, not very many women had access to abortion. No women had access to abortion up north or in small towns. So in Quebec, there was no access because the hospitals were Catholic and no hospitals were required to have a therapeutic abortion committee. And so there was very, very limited access. So in 1969, a group of women in Vancouver organized what later became known as the Abortion Caravan. And there's Piquet. And they traveled across Canada and had rallies in every city. And in a way, they structured the new women's movement, what we now call second wave feminism in Canada, because they got together all the women who wanted to fight for choice in that town. And they went to Ottawa, which is our nation's capital, and they went to the prime minister's home, but he wasn't there. So they decided to take a tactic from the suffragettes in Britain, and they chained themselves to the gallery in Parliament. and of course got arrested and so on and so forth. But anyway, they really kicked off a pro-choice movement. But what happened after that was the group that took over, the Canadian Abortion Rights Action League, focused on lobbying for change, basically, until Dr. Morgentaler opened a clinic in in Montreal. Does everybody know who Dr. Morgentaler is? No. Okay. Dr. Morgentaler, he was a Holocaust survivor, and he was a doctor in Montreal, and women would come to him and ask for abortions, and they couldn't get them, and he believed in choice and abortion. He didn't see why it should be illegal, so he started himself doing abortions in his clinic secretly. And then he decided to go public. And he went public on television saying that he had performed 1,000 abortions. And of course, he got arrested. He went initially to jail. And in Quebec, he was acquitted 3 times. They kept rearresting him. And you have to realize the vast majority of people who live in Quebec are Catholics. Okay. So he got acquitted 3 times by a Catholic jury. Right. And finally, when the Parti Québécois, which was a nationalist and a social democratic government, got elected, they said they would not apply the law. Now, in Canada is different than the United States in quite a number of ways, but one way is that the criminal code is federal. There is no criminal law that's passed by the province or, in your case, the state. We do not have that. The criminal law is always federal, and this decision of Quebec not to apply the abortion law, I think, is about the only example that I can find anyway in Canadian history where a province refused to apply a federal criminal law and publicly announced that they would, as long as it was healthy, safe circumstances. So the Birth Control and VD Center in Toronto, um, they were helping women to access abortion. And it was like, if you want to get an abortion, they'd have to start calling at 8:30 in the morning to the hospital and call and call and call and call. And then finally they'd get an answer maybe after 3 hours, and they say, oh, all full, to call tomorrow, right? So you can imagine that women on their own just couldn't do it. They would just get too demoralized. So, and there were various ways that women would still get illegal abortions, but also we took advantage of the fact that by this point, abortion was legal in the States. And so there were feminists who drove women down to the States to clinics to get abortions. And then in 1982, the BC and VD clinic decided they had to do something about this. And their idea was to invite Dr. Morgentaler to open an illegal clinic in Toronto. And I won't get into details about it, but he finally agreed. It took him a while to agree. And the clinic was opened in 1983. And I got involved. I was a Trotskyist. Okay, I was a member of a Trotskyist group in Toronto, and I quit for various reasons we don't have to go into. And but I quit. And the day after I quit, there was an organizing meeting in Toronto about the idea of setting up an abortion clinic, and I went. And because I have a big mouth, somebody said, "You want to be on the steering committee?" Because I'm a good talker. So I was on this. So I said, "Yeah." So I was on the steering committee. So I wasn't really that into it. I never had an unwanted pregnancy myself. I was never that into abortion. I did help refer women for illegal abortions in Montreal when I was there, just because, it just seemed unfair to me that they couldn't get it. But it wasn't like my big issue. It's just what was happening in the city. So that's just my personal thing. And we had a couple of weeks later, we held a public meeting with Dr. Morgentaler, and it was huge. Like, people are lined up around the block to get in. So we knew we had something that people wanted, right? And we opened the clinic, and the day the clinic opened, now I have to preface this by saying political violence is very rare in Canada. It almost never happens, okay? And that's an important part of the story. So we opened the clinic. There was no patients the first day. Dr. Morgentaler arrived from Montreal at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And as he would, and I was one of the 2 women to escort him across the street. And as we escorted him across the street, you have to realize there was like at least 30 television cameras, okay? Because it was a big news story. Um, a guy comes out of nowhere and comes like this to Dr. Morgenthaler with very sharp garden. I actually didn't realize that till Mike's movie, how sharp they were. But anyway, very sharp garden shears, grabs Morgenthaler and goes to stab him. And I pulled his hand off Morgenthaler and pushed him away. And that's how I became well known in Canada because this was, on every newscast, on every not only that day, but every time they mentioned Morgenthaler, they show the clip, right? So I became the girl from the clinic, people would call me, right? First, they didn't know my name, just the girl from the clinic. So anyway, after about 3 weeks, we they arrested him and the other doctors that were there and charged them with, breaking the abortion law. And I just want to say that for us, and I know this is different in your case because everything's so polarized in the States now, but for us, it was really interesting because the cops were trying to figure out a way to discredit him because he was really a very popular figure, the sort of little guy against the system sort of thing. And he was very, very skilled in the media. And so I was at the clinic because he had asked me to be spokesperson for the clinic at first, but he decided I was too radical. Anyway, and so I was at the clinic that day. I wasn't working for him; I was a volunteer there. But and the doorbell rang, and it was a guy from a radio station, and he had, two. For those of you that are too young to remember this, they had two tape recorders going. There were no computers or no cell phones, nothing like that. Two tape recorders going. And on one tape recorder, he played me an interview with a woman with an accent who said that Dr. Morgenthaler forced her to have an abortion. Okay. And on the other, he asked for my comment. So I said, well, I didn't know anything about this case, but I did know that Dr. Morgenthaler had been doing abortions in Quebec for 10 years, and there had never been a single mistake, a single complaint, right? So I'll get back to them. Well, what happened was that the story was not what she did freak out, but she freaked out in the middle of the procedure, so he couldn't stop, right? Because it would be too dangerous. So at the end, though, she was very happy to have had the procedure. She hugged all the nurses. She was fine, right? But what happened that showed us that we had public support that we really didn't even imagine that we had was that there was a reporter there who oh no. So what happened was we got a call from the taxi driver who drove her home, from the immigration office, from the hospital, like every place the cops took her, we got a call that the cops were intimidating her, that they were pressuring her to say what she was saying. The taxi driver said she was fine. There was no problem until the cops came, right? So that's when I knew anyway that we were going to win this because they can't lie. Everybody was, and in Canada, people don't do things like that. Like it was really unusual. I'd never heard of anything like that. People risking their jobs to tell us what was really going on, right? So, and then, it was, we went through the trial, and during the trial, which went on, by the time it happened, and then it went on for about a year, we talked to everybody, okay? There's three things we did that I think were key to the victory. One, we went to the labor movement. The NDP, the Ontario NDP, the New Democratic Party, which is connected to the labor movement, they were opposed to the clinic because it was illegal, okay? But we went to the 1983 OFL, Ontario Federation of Labor Convention, and we won the convention. Even though there were a lot of Catholic workers there were a lot of people who were questioning whether they could support abortion, but it was a great discussion and we won. And then the labor movement was central because there was a lot of violence, which we were not accustomed to at the clinic, by the clinic. And the labor movement came out and helped defend the clinic and helped teach us how to defend the clinic. That was one thing we did right. The second thing was we had what we called escorts. Because women were being harassed by the cops, we trained a group of women to pick up the woman, bring her to the clinic, and go home with her if she wanted to be picked up, but always to go home with her. So that when the cops came, these women were trained how to deal with the cops, what their rights were, what the women's rights were. And And that was great, but also it created a cadre. These women often, I meet them all, I meet them like every once in a while. They wouldn't go on the marches. We had marches too, right? But they wouldn't go on the marches. They were too nervous about that. But they had a stake in the clinic and they were like a cadre, right? They always came out when we needed them. So that was very important. And then the third thing is we didn't rely on the court case. And this was something we learned from what we thought was a mistake that feminists made in the United States, which is once Roe v. Wade happened, they went on to other things. And in the meantime, the anti-choice grew and grew and grew. So we knew the anti-choice was already there in Toronto, in Canada, and we didn't want it to grow. So we went everywhere. Like I said, I went to more churches in those few years than I ever will go to in my whole life, thank goodness. And sometimes it's good to go to church, but and debated the anti-choice everywhere. We debated them everywhere. And then the last thing we did that I think really made a difference was we united across differences. Because we had a group of women, we called them, we have a rich section of Toronto called Rosedale. We called them the Rosedale ladies, you know. We couldn't stand them, but they raised money for the Morgenthau, for the court case, which we needed, you know, it was very expensive, right? We worked with anybody who would agree with us to legalize freestanding clinics. So that was our demand. Whatever other differences we might have had, we worked together. And in the end, after the Supreme Court decision, which we'll come back to, Brian Mulroney was a right-wing prime minister, tried to recriminalize abortion, and it passed the House of Commons. And in the Senate, it was defeated. It was defeated by a woman named Pat Carney, who had been his economic minister and who was like, for most of us, a virulent enemy of everything we believed in, but she was powerfully pro-choice, and she voted against the resolution, the motion to legalize abortion. And she was fired. She was in the cabinet. He fired her, and she knew she would be, but she took that principled stand, right? So I think those are the things that made us victorious, and that we had to this day, only 8% of Canadians think abortion should be illegal. Only 8%, right? Even with an increase in right-wing support. That's the one issue in which they haven't been able to increase the support. And even, you know, the Conservative Party, which has moved very far to the right in Canada, is more like now your current Republican Party, not quite as bad, but it's getting there. Even there's not strong support. And even like Stephen Harper, who was a very right-wing prime minister and himself a ferocious anti-choice person, never tried to recriminalize abortion. None of them ever tried to recriminalize abortion again. Knock on wood, you know? So the problem, they focus on access, and that's a problem. And that's people who are still involved, they're fighting to improve access. But no one after Mulroney ever tried to recriminalize abortion again. And the public support has held all this time, right? So I think that it's a really, for me, you know, I've been involved in lots of different issues, and nothing was ever better organized than this, in my opinion. We never succeeded in doing anything better than this because we did it on every level, legal, in the streets, community, right? And when Roe v. Wade was struck down by the Supreme Court, called the Dobbs decision, there was an effort in Canada to actually make a law. Like, see, what happened is the Supreme Court struck down the abortion law. We didn't want an abortion law. We said abortion is a medical procedure. We don't have a cancer law. We don't have a, you know, gallbladder law, right? If you want an abortion, it's a medical procedure. It's up to you and your doctor to decide, like any other medical procedure. And so we were very strong against making it a law because some of the liberal feminists wanted to pass a law legalizing abortion. Well, that just gives the anti-choice a chance to organize, right? So we didn't want that. We wanted it the way it is. There is no law, right? And that's the way it's going to stay. So um, I guess I'll leave it at that. And I think the best thing would be to answer questions. Um,
Be-
And the other thing, it's kind of weird. I have to say this because it's so weird. So then I became very well known, right? And I became, then they asked me to run as president of the National Action Committee on the Status of Women, which was amazing because NAC was like now in the sense that it's very middle of the road and mainstream. And I'm a real radical, you know? And I was even more, well, I think I'm more of a radical now, but people thought I was more of a radical then. And the most and like very conservative women asked me to run as president because they knew Mulroney would go after feminism, right? And they needed a fighter. So they asked me to run. And so what was I going to say that? Yeah, so the odd thing is that somehow I managed to come out of all this like being some kind of symbol of feminist resistance in the country. So that now I'm working with a group that's trying to raise money from philanthropists. And like they all just want to give money because it's me. It's so weird. Like I feel so weird. These are people I fought my whole life. And now all of a sudden, I guess it's because I'm so old. I don't know. But anyway, I just turned 80. So anyway.
Congratulations.
So yeah, it's just it's kind of weird, that's all.
Oh, thank you very much, Judy. That was a fabulous presentation, and I think we're very much in the same wavelength of how to organize and build a movement. And I also especially want to welcome PK Much, who is here, who is the one who put us in touch with Judy, and is also a fighter up there in Toronto.